Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into the brittle chill of an old West winter, and you feel it hit your cheeks before you even have time to brace yourself. Snow lies in deep drifts against a rough cabin wall, and the moment you push the door open, you hear that long wooden groan that always happens when frozen hinges try to move. You probably will not survive this kind of cold if you try it in real life, not with that thin jacket you're probably wearing right now. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Then tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights and let yourself step fully into that frontier darkness as the wind presses against your back. You stand in the threshold of a frontier cabin near the end of the 19th century. It is not the romantic, spotless version you see in old paintings. The real one feels cramped, smells faintly of smoke and old wood, and leaks cold from places you cannot yet identify. You take a step inside and the floorboards flex slightly under your weight, as if reminding you that everything here is handmade, everything here is fragile. It is the dead of winter, the type settlers later described as the season when eyelashes froze before you reach the well. One established historical detail hits you first throughout the Old West. Settlers often battled indoor temperatures that hovered only a little above freezing during winter nights. A fire was not a luxury. It was the thin line between survival and disaster, and you notice it now, glowing dimly in the hearth, its warmth struggling to reach the far corners of the room. You move slowly, adjusting to the dim light, listening to the steady pop of sap inside half-frozen logs. The whole place feels like a living thing that is always breathing and always complaining. The walls let in drafts that sneak across your ankles. The ceiling creaks as if the wind on the roof has its own personality. You can smell pine resin, old leather, and some lingering scent of dinner that happened hours ago. Maybe beans, maybe salt pork, maybe something stewed until it surrendered to the pot. You take another breath and let your eyes wander. There is nothing glamorous here, just necessity arranged in the closest thing to comfort the family can afford. A rough table built from nearby timber, a few chairs that wobble, a trunk that holds clothes thick with smoke, and a bed frame that looks sturdy enough if you do not shift too much. Quilts pile on top in mismatched layers. Some are patched with scraps of old shirts. Others are stuffed with wool if the family was lucky. Nothing matches, and yet it all looks right, as if the frontier rewarded practicality above every other virtue. Layers of snow cling to the doorframe. The storm outside is still moving, making a soft whistle through the cracks. The night here feels unusually long. That is another thing you realise winter nights in the Old West stretched out like slow hours soaking through your bones. People often went to bed early not because they wanted to rest, but because darkness made everything else impossible. A quirky little tidbit comes to mind as you adjust to the gloom. Some settlers believed that sleeping with a split onion near the bedside would somehow purify the air, or keep sickness away in the heavy winter months. It sounds odd, but when you live in a place where cold air feels like a physical threat, you grow quick to trust remedies that seem harmless and mildly hopeful. You walk deeper into the cabin, hearing how your footsteps echo softly. The floor is uneven in places and straw has been stuffed between boards to keep cold drafts down. You lift your hand toward the ceiling and even inches below it the air is warmer layered like invisible blankets. People knew this. They knew how heat collected high and disappeared low, and they built their lives around those truths. You feel it now, the way your fingers warm up once they reach the upper air, as if the room itself is offering you a little lesson: stay low and freeze rise up and survive. The fire dims for a moment, dropping to a low red glow. You instinctively step closer. The hearth is the heart of this entire place. Without it, everything would fall apart. It gives light heat and a kind of reassurance you can feel in your chest. It crackles, shifting, releasing a warm scent that is part wood smoke and part something deeper. Something almost comforting. You crouch near it for a moment, letting your hands thaw slowly. Your fingertips tingle with that familiar sensation of warming up too quickly. It stings, but it tells you that you're still alive. You lean closer and notice the embers glowing like tiny red eyes. Someone has banked them carefully. That was common practice. People would cover embers with ash to keep them smouldering through the night. Waking up to a cold hearth was a nightmare scenario. It meant starting a fire from scratch sometimes in temperatures that stiffened your breath. Historians still argue whether winter cabin life made settlers more cautious or simply more fatalistic. Maybe both, maybe neither. All you know now is that you feel the pressure of that fire's survival, as if it is your responsibility too. You turn your head and catch sight of the bedding again, thick piles heavy with use. You feel an odd sympathy for the people who curled under them night after night. You imagine what it is like to lie down knowing your breath will turn into small clouds. Your blankets might develop a thin crust of frost near the edges by morning. Your toes might never feel truly warm until spring, and your sleep might come in uneven stretches interrupted by cold wind snapping branches or the dull anxiety of winter's slow hunger. You wander to the single small window. Frost webbing covers the inside of the glass. You touch it gently and feel it crackle. Outside, the snowstorm swirls under the moonlight, and the world looks empty except for wind and pale movement. You shiver not just from the cold, but from the sense of isolation that frontier families lived with every day. Nights like these stretched time until it felt thin and breakable. The air inside grows slightly warmer as the fire picks up again. You hear a low whistle from the chimney and the wind outside changes tone. It almost sounds like words like something calling across the frozen landscape. You pull back from the window and settle near the hearth once more, letting the warmth touch your face. You begin to feel the rhythm of this place, light shadow heat, cold breath quiet. Everything cycles at its own unhurried pace. You realise that for all its harshness, winter sleep in the Old West was not simply misery. It was a pattern, a learned acceptance, a slow ritual of settling down with the elements and trusting your own endurance. And as you step deeper into the story, the warmth of the fire follows you, flickering softly, guiding you toward the long frontier night still ahead. You move from the hearth toward the far wall and feel the air shift against your skin. It thins, cools, and brushes across your wrist like a tiny warning. You pause, because here in this cabin you start to understand how walls are not really walls, in the way you imagine them at home. In the Old West, they breathe leak sigh and sometimes whisper when the wind hits them just right. You lift your hand and hold it near one of the seams between the logs. The draft slips through like a thin ribbon of winter itself. You pull your hand back, surprised by how sharp the chill feels. This entire structure is built from logs cut nearby, mostly pine or fir, depending on the landscape. That is a verified historical detail. Settlers often used the trees closest to their homesteads, shaping the logs with axes and pulling them into place by hand, or with the help of an exhausted mule. You picture the rough rhythm of the work, thick beams lifted, bark stripped, edges flattened, gaps filled. The cabin you are touching now would have taken weeks, maybe months to finish. And even then, winter always found its way in. You lean closer and notice the material crammed between the logs. It looks lumpy and uneven. This is daub made from mud, straw, clay, maybe even bits of animal hair or old cloth. People used whatever they had. Some mixed ash into it because they believed it helped keep pests away. Others swore by moss gathered from nearby creek beds. The whole point was to plug the places where the wind could seep through. You feel how imperfect the effort is because your fingers still detect a subtle vibration of cold air moving behind the wall. As you stand there, the faint smell of old wet earth rises from the daub. It is not unpleasant. It is simply real, raw and honest, the scent of human hands shaping a home inside an unforgiving landscape. A quirky historical tidbit drifts to mind. Some settlers tucked spare pages from old newspapers between logs as added insulation. They believed the print ink somehow slowed drafts. It is unlikely the ink helped, but the paper definitely added a bit of padding. You imagine a child lying in bed at night listening to the wind whistle past stories about distant towns they would never see. You trace your fingertips across the wood grain and feel how the cold lives inside it. Pine expands and contracts through winter nights so the logs sometimes creaked loudly enough to wake entire families. You listen now as a small groan ripples through the wall. It sounds almost like the cabin is clearing its throat. You cannot help but smile at the idea that these buildings had personalities, moods, even voices. And maybe they did, at least in the evenings when the wind pressed hard against them. You move along the wall and the floor responds softly beneath your feet. Each board flexes a little. Every step seems to stir a new draft from a place you did not expect. Settlers understood this too. They laid rugs or scattered straw on the floor to trap heat, not because it was stylish, but because the cold liked to rise from the ground like a patient predator. You brush the toe of your boot across the edge of one of these makeshift coverings. It crunches faintly, probably frozen in spots from the damp that seeped up earlier that day. You take a breath and feel how the air at this side of the cabin carries a different character compared to the firelit centre. It is sharper, thinner, and almost metallic. You can taste the cold lightly on your tongue. It brings a kind of awareness to your senses. Settlers describe this feeling as the cabin having warm spots and cold corners. You understand now. One step forward is comfort. One step sideways is discomfort. Night after night you would learn the exact placement of warmth, almost like navigating invisible borders. You press your palm flat against a log and close your eyes. The surface is cool, rough and faintly damp. Winter moisture clings stubbornly, soaking slowly into the wood. Inside the cabin, that dampness becomes a presence you learn to ignore, but it affects everything. Bedding, clothing, tools stored against walls, even the rhythm of your breath. You open your eyes again and spot the places where frost has begun forming on the log edges. In the darkest corners of cabins like this, frost flowers sometimes form delicate white patterns. They looked beautiful, but reminded families just how thin the barrier between them and the wilderness really was. You step back. The wall seems almost alive. It exhales small puffs of cold, then settles again. This is the breathing effect settlers talked about. A living building that expands in daylight warmth and contracts in night chill. You sweep your hand across the surface again and notice how uneven it is. You picture the builder working hurriedly before winter arrived, trying to finish before the first heavy storm. You can almost see him wiping sweat from his face while the logs scraped his knuckles. Historians still argue whether cabins like these were genuinely efficient winter shelters, or simply the best option people had under pressure. Some claim the thick logs were remarkably good insulators. Others insist the constant drafts destroyed any notion of comfort. After feeling the leaks yourself, you understand why the debate continues. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. The cabins were good enough, never perfect, always flawed, always dependable in their own rugged frontier way. You shift your gaze to the ceiling. Thick beams stretch across the room, holding the weight of the snow above. These beams sometimes cracked under prolonged storms. You imagine lying in bed, listening to snowpack settle on the roof, wondering if it might break through by morning. That awareness must have added a layer of tension to every winter night. You tilt your head and imagine small flakes filtering down through tiny gaps, drifting gently onto quilts. It happened more often than you think. You walk toward the corner where supplies are stacked against the wall. Barrels, crates, burlap sacks, maybe a basket of root vegetables, all pressed tight against the logs in an attempt to block drafts. You run your hand across a sack. The fabric feels stiff and cold. Everything stored here absorbs the temperature of the walls. Even food becomes icy. Settlers sometimes found their molasses solidifying into a near brick by morning. You picture them placing the jar near the fire and waiting impatiently for it to loosen. Your body adjusts again to the pattern of warm and cold. You feel yourself moving instinctively toward the hearth, even while your curiosity pulls you deeper along the walls. This is how life worked inside these cabins. You always balance between the desire for comfort and the need to manage the space around you. The walls might have kept predators and storms out, but they never let you forget their limits. You pause once more and take in the whole room from this vantage point. The crackling fire, the frost at the window, the walls with their strange breathing, the lingering scent of smoke drifting lazily in the air. Each element reminds you that winter in the Old West was a constant negotiation. You learned how to sleep not by conquering the cold, but by adapting to it, shaping your nights around the quirks of the home you built with your own hands. And now, as you let the fire's dim glow guide you away from the drafty wall, you begin to settle more deeply into the rhythm of frontier winter nights, trusting that each breath of warmth will carry you forward into the next quiet moment. You drift back toward the fire and let its shifting glow catch your eyes again. The cabin feels slightly warmer now, though the cold never truly leaves. It lingers in corners and clings to the floor like a stubborn visitor who refuses to step outside. You sink slowly to a low stool beside the hearth, and for a moment the world narrows to the sounds of crackling pine, the faint hiss of sap, and the quiet pulse of heat that works its way toward your hands. This is where winter nights in the Old West gained their rhythm. Fire was the anchor that held everything together. You lean closer and notice how the flames move and change colour with every fresh log. People then knew fire intimately. They read its moods, predicted its sputters, understood its language. One long-enduring record from frontier journals notes that families often judged the coming weather based on how the fire behaved at dusk. A lively flame meant steadier skies. A sluggish one hinted at a storm. You pay attention to the one before you now. It dances a little too wildly at first, then settles into a steady glow. You feel a subtle comfort in that steadiness. Your fingertips warm gently. The skin on your knuckles loosens its tightness. A wave of heat rolls up your sleeve. You lift your palms and let them hover above the dancing light. A soft orange wash glows against your wrists. This warmth is not just pleasant, it is essential. Everything in this room depends on the fire. Cooking, heating, light morale, and even sleep. A home without a working hearth would be unthinkable in the depth of winter, and you can sense why. Your shoulders relax, slightly pulled into that warm embrace. You shift your focus to the firewood stacked nearby. A small pile of split logs and bark still flaking rests at the ready. Old West families planned their winter fuel with almost mathematical care. Using too much too early meant freezing later. Using too little meant restless nights with shivering limbs. You run a finger over one piece of wood. It feels dry, rough, and surprisingly light. They would have chopped this wood in warmer seasons and stacked it under eaves or makeshift sheds to dry. Every log here is a promise of warmth, and people treated each one with respect. A soft pop startles you, as a knot in the wood bursts under the heat. Sparks jump like tiny fireflies before fading into the hearth. The smell that rises next is deep and earthy, a smoky perfume that settles into fabric, hair, and memory. Many pioneer women complained that everything they owned smelled faintly like a campfire from October through March. You breathe in, and the scent settles easily into your lungs. It reminds you of long nights, thick blankets, and a world moving at a slower pace. There is a peculiar little note you notice now. The fire has pieces of dried sage in it. Maybe someone tossed them in earlier. Some settlers believed that burning sage or cedar helped purify the air or ward off winter sickness. It is a side detail people rarely mention, yet it fits naturally into this space. As the faint herbal scent rises, it mixes with the sharpness of wood smoke, creating a smell that feels older than the cabin itself. You stir the logs gently with an iron poker. The metal handle is cold enough to bite at your fingers, but the tip glows faintly from sitting too close to the coals. You push one log toward the centre and watch sparks swirl upward in tiny spirals. The fire brightens instantly. For a moment, the shadows around the room leap back as if surprised. This small act of tending the fire was part of the nightly ritual. People took turns, especially when storms raged outside. You can imagine the half-asleep shuffle across the room, the sigh, the quick adjustment, the attempt to slip back under covers without losing all the warmth stored in the bedding. A low hum fills the cabin. It takes you a few seconds to realise it is the sound of rising heat curling up the stone chimney. The draft pulls smoke upward with a soft, constant whisper. This is the cabin breathing again, though in a gentler way compared to the icy leaks in the walls. You tilt your head and watch how the flames funnel naturally toward the chimney opening, drawn upward, as though pulled by invisible hands. You notice the firelight reflecting off metal near the hearth. A kettle sits tucked close to the embers. The surface is blackened, dented, and coated in the residue of 100 winter nights spent warming water or simmering leftovers. People often kept water warm overnight because frozen water was more than an inconvenience. It made cooking difficult, washing impossible, and morning routines painfully slow. You touch the side of the kettle and feel a mild heat. Not enough to burn, just enough to promise usefulness. You wrap your hands around a wooden cup that rests nearby. Someone filled it earlier. It contains warm water or maybe a thin broth. As you lift it toward your lips, steam curls upward in lazy trails. You sip slowly. The warmth spreads through your chest, dissolving a layer of winter weariness. In frontier diaries, there are entries describing how a hot drink before sleep made the cold feel less threatening. Even if the cabin walls moaned and snow piled high, the warmth inside your body helped you drift off. The fire crackles again, interrupting your thoughts. A log shifts and collapses inward, sending a rush of sparks upward. You watch them fade with a quiet fascination. There is something hypnotic about the steady glow, the movements, the sounds. You could almost fall asleep right here on the floor, letting the warmth seep into your legs. Then another thought rises. Some frontier families believed certain patterns in the fire predicted luck or misfortune. If a log cracked loudly, it might signal a visitor on the way. If smoke curled back into the room instead of up the chimney, someone might argue the next day. These were not universal beliefs, but they added a layer of story and superstition to everyday life. You glance at the smoke. It travels neatly upward, smooth and steady. That seems like a good omen for your coming night. You lean back slightly, feeling the warmth reach your face. The glow maps itself across your cheeks, soft and comforting. You become aware of your own breath, the rhythm of inhaling warm air and exhaling small clouds of steam that vanish instantly. You let that rhythm settle in your mind. Your eyelids grow heavier. The line between wakefulness and drifting becomes thin, but before you slip too far, a thought nudges you gently. Some researchers today still discuss the deeper psychological comfort the hearth provided. It was not just a source of heat, but a symbol of safety, community, and survival. When everything outside was frozen and silent, the fire spoke in its own language. Soft hisses, low rumbles, bright sparks. It reminded you that you were not alone. Even if the nearest neighbour lived miles away across empty fields, the fire kept you anchored to the idea of home. You shift again, watching the flames swirl around the largest log. Light glints off the iron tools hanging alongside the hearth. Shadows flicker across the ceiling. You realise you could sit here for hours, breathing in the warmth and listening to the long winter night press gently against the cabin walls. The fire steadies itself, and its glow wraps around you like another layer of blankets. You settle deeper into that glow, ready to follow it into the next quiet moment of the long frontier night. You rise from your seat by the hearth, letting the warmth cling to you for a final lingering moment before you drift toward the bed. The quilts and hides stacked there catch your eye first. They look heavy, uneven, and slightly awkward, but there is something comforting in the roughness. You run your hand across the top layer and feel the thick, slightly oily texture of a buffalo robe. Its coarse hair brushes your skin in a way that feels ancient and instinctive, as if it carries the memory of plains, snow, and long migrations carved into every fibre. One detail that frontier accounts consistently mention is the sheer importance of buffalo hides in winter. They served as coats, bedding, door coverings, and sometimes even makeshift mattresses. You tug lightly at the edge of the robe, surprised by its weight. Settlers often said sleeping under one felt like being pressed gently into the earth. Heavy, warm, a little wild. You pull the robe up and inhale. The scent is faint but distinct, an earthy musk that never fully washes out. It once belonged to a living animal that endured winters far harsher than anything a person might survive. You lift a corner of the quilts underneath. They are lumpy, unevenly stitched, and clearly handmade. Old West families rarely wasted fabric. Every scrap from worn shirts, faded dresses, or torn flour sacks became part of a quilt. Some squares are patterned, others plain. Some are patched multiple times. You imagine a mother sewing late at night, her fingers numbed by cold, trying to create one more layer of warmth before the next storm arrived. You press down on the mattress and it crunches softly. This is a straw tick, a common feature in frontier beds. It is filled with dried grass or hay packed into a cloth envelope. Over time, the straw breaks down, flattening and shifting into odd lumps that poke at your ribs. People stirred and refilled these ticks regularly. You lower your weight onto it now, and the unevenness surprises you. There is a hollow near your hip, a firm bump under your knee. The bed refuses to conform to your body. Instead, you must adjust yourself to it. A faint scent rises from the straw, dry, dusty, with a hint of old fields baked under summer sun. You would not expect a bed to smell like harvest season, yet here it is a reminder of life beyond the walls, tucked beneath quilts and hides in the middle of winter. You shift your attention to a corner where spare bedding is stacked. You notice something odd, a folded length of canvas lying among the quilts. Some families used layers of canvas or old wagon covers as insulation on particularly brutal nights. It trapped heat efficiently, though it made the bed feel stiff. You run your hand over it. The surface is rough, uneven, and still carries traces of dust that seem permanently embedded. A small, nearly forgotten story comes to mind. In a few remote cabins, people stuffed mattresses not with straw but with dried corn husks. They crinkled loudly every time someone shifted, making a constant soft rustle echo through the night. You imagine the sound now as you settle deeper onto the bedding, a whisper of movement like a field blowing gently under moonlight. Your gaze drifts toward the corner of the mattress where a thick roll of cloth peeks from under the quilts. It turns out to be an old coat repurposed as an extra layer. Frontier resourcefulness knew few limits. If something could hold warmth, it had a place in the nightly sleep ritual. Another detail repeated in many household letters of the time is the practice of layering multiple thin quilts, rather than relying on a single thick blanket. Thin layers created small pockets of trapped air that warmed quickly. You pull one quilt up and feel its softness. The stitching is uneven, the fabric faded. Yet it feels surprisingly warm the moment it settles against your skin. You stretch out on the straw tick and let your body sink into the imperfect softness. The cold immediately pushes up through the mattress, reminding you that comfort was always partial in this era. The warmth of the fire reaches this spot only faintly. Your breath fills the air in soft clouds that drift above you before disappearing. You glance at the wooden frame around the bed. It creaks softly when you shift. The wood is rough cut by hand and still shows faint tool marks. Beds like these were sometimes built right into the structure of the cabin, connected to the wall for stability. You touch the frame and feel the cold absorbed into the wood. It sends a faint chill up your arm. Your thoughts drift to the materials settlers used when hides or quilts were scarce. One recorded practice mentions stuffing beds with dried leaves during emergency conditions. Another mentions layering wool clothing beneath the sleeper to keep the cold from rising from the ground. You picture yourself lying atop layers of shirts, trousers, shawls, and coats, turning them into a nest of warmth. As you settle deeper into the bedding, you consider how people arrange themselves at night. Large families often slept together for warmth, children between parents, older relatives near the fire, guests placed wherever space allowed. The bed you lie on now likely hosted multiple people on the coldest nights, each body contributing to the shared heat. A slow creak echoes from the rafters above you, followed by a soft patter of snow sliding across the roof. The sound eases you further into the setting. Winter nights had their own compositions. The shifting of wooden beams, the muffled thud of snow falling in clumps, the faint rustle of small animals moving under the cabin. All of it blended into a lullaby no one asked for, but everyone learned to accept. You adjust the quilts again, pulling them up toward your chin. The weight surprises you. It feels like someone gently pressing you into stillness. This heaviness calms your breath. Your limbs loosen. Your body warms, slowly helped by the way the hides trap heat against your chest and legs. You let your hand slip beneath the buffalo robe, testing the layers beneath. The wool is rough, almost scratchy, but it holds warmth exceptionally well. Diaries of the time often praise the insulating power of wool even when damp. That small detail would matter immensely in a cabin where humidity crept through walls and where steam from the hearth drifted into blankets nightly. Yet one question still lingers. Modern historians sometimes debate how comfortable these beds truly were. Some argue that the combination of hides, quilts and straw created a surprisingly warm sleeping environment. Others insist the drafts, uneven stuffing and constant cold seeping upward made rest fragmented and shallow. You lie there now and feel truth tugging from both sides. There is warmth, but it is a conditional warmth, a warmth you must protect, maintain and work for. Your hand drifts to the edge of the straw tick where the fabric is stitched in a crooked line. You trace your finger along it. You imagine someone sitting near the fire needle in hand repairing this very seam during a long winter evening. Their stitches are uneven, rush-tired, but they hold the straw inside, they hold the warmth steady. You breathe in again. The bedding smells faintly of smoke, wool and earth. It feels lived in, shaped by countless nights of survival. You sink into that sensation, letting the warmth gather around your ribs. Outside, the wind shifts direction. It taps at the cabin wall with a hollow thud. Inside, wrapped in hides and quilts heavy with history, you feel a small bubble of comfort form around you. Imperfect, thin in places, but real. You close your eyes, letting the bed's uneven softness cradle your weight as the long winter night stretches ahead. You pull yourself up from the bedding, feeling its lingering warmth cling to your legs as you stand. The moment you leave those heavy hides, the cold wraps around your ankles again. It waits patiently, always ready to reclaim whatever warmth you manage to build. You take a slow breath, watching your exhale fade into the dimness. Then your attention drifts towards something lying near the bedside, a pair of boots placed carefully within reach. You crouch down and touch them. The leather feels stiff cold and slightly damp from melted snow earlier in the day. You press your thumb into the side and feel how the material is frozen into a near-solid shape. It hits you instantly why Old West sleepers kept boots near or even inside their beds. Diaries from ranch hands often mention that footwear left on the floor during winter nights turned so rigid by morning that you could not bend the leather enough to slip your foot inside. In extreme cases, people even slept with their boots tucked under blankets, not for sentimental reasons, but because frozen boots could delay morning chores in dangerous ways. You hold the boot close to your chest for a moment, letting your warmth soften the leather. It slowly yields under your palm. You imagine how many nights people curled up with their gear, the same way treating clothing like vital companions rather than objects. Winter survival required you to think ahead. If something froze, you suffered. That simple truth guided decisions at every hour. You glance around and notice clothing draped over the end of the bed. A heavy coat, thick wool trousers, a shirt that looks more like coarse burlap than anything comfortable. The seams bulge where extra pieces have been stitched in to reinforce elbows and knees. You lift the shirt and feel how cold it is. The fabric bites lightly at your fingertips. It is unpleasant, but the alternative is worse. Putting on frozen clothes in the morning was an agony people described in painful detail. You bring the shirt close to the firelight and feel how even this slight warmth softens the fibres. A small memory from frontier letters floats into mind. Some families slept with their firearms or tools within the bedding too, not because of bandit fears, but because metal froze so quickly that touching it barehanded in the morning could feel like grabbing ice. You look toward the corner and see the faint silhouette of a metal pan hanging on a hook. Even from here you can sense the cold radiating off its surface. You return to the boots. One lies on its side, the other upright. You pull the upright one closer and peek inside. The lining is worn thin. A bit of wool stuffing fluffs upward, brittle with age. You imagine slipping your foot inside and feeling that first shocking chill before the warmth slowly builds. People in the Old West did not expect comfort. They expected tolerable discomfort, and they shaped their lives accordingly. You sit on the edge of the straw tick and examine a pair of thick socks resting nearby. They are wool-patched again and again. One toe seam has been repaired so many times it looks more knot than fabric. You run your hand over the rough stitching, recognizing the care put into it. A recorded household note from the period mentions that socks were sometimes the most valued item during winter, because they were the first to wear through. You can understand why. Every step inside a freezing cabin required protection, and wool was the thin shield between flesh and frost. You lift a sock to your nose. It carries the faint smell of smoke and lanolin, the natural oil of wool that helps repel moisture. That smell has a strange comfort to it. You imagine how people pulled these socks on right after dinner, keeping them warm from the fire before slipping quickly into bed. That warmth would fade within minutes, but even a brief moment of comfort mattered deeply. A small peculiar detail emerges from the back of your mind. Some settlers place small heated stones near their feet at bedtime. They wrapped the stones in cloth to prevent burns. The warmth lasted short minutes, but those minutes helped them drift into sleep faster. You imagine reaching under the buffalo robe now and finding such a stone nestled near your toes. The idea is charming and practical all at once. You stand again and walk slowly across the floorboards. Your socks brush lightly against the rough wood. You move toward the hooks on the wall where more clothing hangs. Coats of varying thickness, scarves knitted loosely, mittens lined with fur. Every item seems heavy, weighed down by months of use. You reach for a coat and lift it. The weight pulls your shoulder downward. It smells of horse smoke and sweat. It is not unpleasant, just intensely human. You run your hand along the inside. The fabric is soft, warmed by years of wear. A coat like this would often be worn to bed on the coldest nights. People sometimes curled into sleep fully clothed, layering themselves like nesting dolls. Removing clothing was a luxury reserved for warmer months. You can picture yourself lying beneath quilts coat still wrapped around your torso. Boots tucked, close socks thick enough to feel reassuring. You step close to the wall and notice a hat resting nearby. A wide brim, slightly bent from use. The crown dented. The interior band worn smooth. Keeping a hat close to the bed was practical too. On frostbitten mornings, stepping outside, bareheaded, could be dangerous. You pick it up and feel the cold in its fibres. It would warm quickly with body heat, but only if kept close. You return to the bed and set the hat near the quilts. You sit again, letting your weight sink into the straw tick. The clothing surrounding you feels like an informal nest. Each piece has a purpose, each holds warmth, each waits to be used at a moment's notice. Outside, a gust of wind slams lightly against the cabin. Snowflakes brush the window like tiny fingers tapping. The sound adds a quiet urgency. You understand why people in this era treated their gear almost like part of their bodies. Losing warmth could mean losing sleep, and losing sleep during winter meant slower reactions, poorer judgment, and increased risk. Every choice mattered. You lift the boots again and slide them gently beneath the quilts, imagining their warmth building gradually as night passes. The thought feels reassuring. You tuck the socks beside them and drape the coat over the foot of the bed. It creates a small bubble of preparedness, a sense that you have done everything possible to make morning less harsh. A final idea settles over you. Some researchers note that keeping personal belongings close during sleep may have offered psychological security in addition to physical warmth. Having boots ready, clothes softened by your own heat, tools within reach, all of it created a sense of control inside a world ruled by unpredictable winter storms. You let that idea rest in your mind as you lie back again. The boots warmed by quilts, the coat within reach, the socks prepared for another frigid dawn. You pull the hides up to your chin and let the weight of winter gear cradle you once more. You let the warmth of the quilts cling to you for another moment, then ease yourself upright again. The fire has settled into a low glow, the kind that sends soft waves of heat across the floor, but no longer lights the room with any real brightness. Shadows stretch long and thin along the walls. With the night deepening, you start to sense the rhythm that governed every winter evening in the Old West, a rhythm of slow tasks, quiet checks, and small rituals someone needed to perform even when half asleep. You step toward the hearth and crouch beside the embers. The air here feels warmer than anywhere else in the cabin. Your hand hovers above the coals, feeling their faint pulse. Frontier families relied heavily on this slow-burning heart of the home. Contemporary homestead notes often mention that someone was always designated to check the fire at set intervals through the night. It was not done out of diligence alone. If the embers died, the room turned icy within minutes. You gently take the poker and nudge one of the glowing chunks of wood. A soft scatter of sparks rises and fades. You sift a little ash over the coals with a metal scoop resting nearby. This creates a thin shell that traps heat inside. Generations of settlers knew this simple trick. It brought them precious hours of warmth. You watch how the embers dim slightly, then steady themselves. It is quiet here, almost meditative. The only sound is the soft rustle of ashes shifting under your hand. Your eyes drift toward the wooden bucket resting near the hearth. It holds small kindling pieces for quick ignition if the fire faltered. Settlers often kept such buckets close, because fumbling around in a dark, freezing room trying to find firewood was a form of nightly torture they preferred to avoid. You pick up a sliver of wood and feel it between your fingers, light, brittle, cold. You place it back gently. A faint noise outside the cabin breaks the silence. A distant thump, maybe a shifting branch or a startled animal brushing against the wall. The Old West night was never entirely still. You walk toward the door, your socks sliding softly across the uneven boards. The cold intensifies with each step. You touch the latch lightly, half expecting frost to cling to it. The metal is cold, but your fingers manage to hold it without a sting. You open the door just enough to peer outside. The moonlight reflects off the snow, turning the entire landscape into a pale silver field. The trees stand rigid, their branches bare and unmoving. You hear a faint groan from the wind as it passes between unseen places. You step 1 foot outside and feel the brutal bite of the cold grip your skin. It is not just cold, it is sharp. You pull back quickly, closing the door to trap what warmth remains. The door clicks shut with a hollow sound. You turn around and rub your arms. Night chores like these were a constant part of winter life. Some involve stepping outside for a few seconds to check if snow piled dangerously against the cabin walls. Others required visiting the lean-to where the animals slept. You imagine yourself bundling in a coat and boots, pushing through deep drifts to check on a horse that might be stamping in discomfort, or a cow whose breath formed thick clouds in the dark. Such tasks happened at every hour whenever the wind changed, or when instincts whispered that something needed attention. A small detail from pioneer letters surfaces in your mind. One family mentioned that they took turns listening for unusual sounds at night. A low creak could mean a weakening roof beam. A sudden thump might be snow sliding from the ridge. A faint rattling noise could indicate animals rooting near the food stores. It required a kind of half-aware vigilance. You move closer to the window now and rest your hand against its frozen frame. The glass shivers faintly as another gust presses against it. You turn back to the centre of the cabin. A faint smell of smoke and dried herbs lingers in the air. You think of how nights were divided into segments rather than one long stretch of sleep. People woke, tended the fire, checked the animals, drank a little warm water, and then settled back into bed. It was not unusual to have 2 or even 3 separate sleep periods each night. This pattern sounds strange now, but the daily routines were shaped by nature, not by clocks. You move toward the table and notice a small cloth bundle resting there. You unfold it and discover a tiny stash of dried spruce twigs. Someone here must have gathered them earlier. Old accounts mention that pioneers sometimes used aromatic twigs to freshen the smoky room after long nights. You lift one to your nose, the scent is faint but clean. You set it carefully aside. You return to the hearth and kneel once more. The embers glow gently, pulsing like a faint heartbeat. You sprinkle a little more ash, then slide a partially burned log closer to the core. The movement brings a low crackle, a spark or two, and a new warmth rising in thin waves. This fire requires constant negotiation. Too much ash kills it. Too little makes it burn too fast. Each adjustment matters. A curious note from a winter traveller appears in your thoughts. He wrote that he sometimes kept small pieces of bread near the hearth to dry out overnight, because eating them cold in the morning felt easier than biting into a frozen loaf. The thought makes you smile. Even survival tasks occasionally bordered on the comical. You look upward at the dark ceiling rafters. The shadows shift as the embers brighten. The wood above you creaks gently. You imagine the roof enduring the weight of snow, tightening in the cold, loosening slightly as the fire warms the air. You sense how fragile the structure feels at this hour, even though it has likely survived many winters already. Your thoughts drift to the emotional atmosphere these nightly chores created. Some researchers suggest that waking at intervals may have given people a sense of shared responsibility. After all, someone always needed to be awake. Someone always had to listen, a just check. The long winter night became a collective effort, a quiet collaboration with no spoken instructions. You let that idea settle inside your mind for a moment. Then you rise from the hearth and stretch. Your joints crack softly. The warmth clings to your face for a final breath, then begins to fade as you step away. You glide back toward the bed, knowing you will need to return to the fire again before dawn, but for now the cabin feels steady. The soft glow from the coals casts a gentle pattern on the walls. The wind outside has calmed slightly. You slip beneath the heavy quilts once more, letting the buffalo robe settle across your chest. The warmth builds slowly, layer by layer. Your eyelids droop and you surrender to a brief drift of rest, knowing that the long winter night still has more rhythms to reveal before morning arrives. You settle beneath the quilts again, letting the warmth rise slowly around your shoulders. Your breathing steadies as the fire's glow softens across the room. For a moment the cabin feels peaceful. Then you hear it. A faint shuffle in the darkness, too light to be a person, and too bold to be the wind. You open your eyes the way someone in the Old West might have done, calmly expecting the cabin to contain more life than just the humans sleeping inside it. Your gaze travels across the room and lands near a pile of stored grain. The fabric bulges for a second, then stills. You smile wryly, because this is no surprise. One common reality of frontier winters noted in household diaries was the presence of small animals living inside the cabin. Mice, squirrels, and the occasional weasel found cracks to slip through when temperatures dropped. As long as they did not destroy food stores, families often tolerated their presence. It was warmer in here than in the outbuildings, and warmth attracted every living creature. You shift under the quilts and listen closely. A tiny rustle, a soft scritch, then silence. You imagine a mouse braving the cold boards, searching for stray crumbs, unaware of you watching. The sound blends easily with the logs cracking in the fire. You adjust one leg and the straw mattress crunches in response. The mouse pauses. You pause. This standoff is gentle, almost humorous. Your eyes drift toward the corner where a cradle sits, pushed tightly beside a stack of blankets. Even that cradle does not seem empty. A faint movement under the quilts reveals a small dog curled at the bottom. It lifts its head sleepily, gives a soft huff of warm breath, then burrows deeper again. Families often let dogs or even young goats sleep inside during the harshest winters. Animals added real warmth, and warmth ignored social categories. You reach out your hand toward the dog, but let it rest. Its slow breathing brings a quiet comfort to the room. A memory from a settler's letter floats into your mind. She wrote that during one fierce winter, the family chickens slept in the kitchen corner because the coop had nearly frozen over. Imagine waking to soft clucks and feathers drifting in the air as you stirred embers at dawn. You glance toward the door now and picture a hen or two perched on a crate, watching the room with calm, dark eyes. You hear another sound above, a faint scamper along the rafters. You tilt your head and follow it. Some families reported chipmunks storing acorns in crevices overhead, or pack rats sneaking inside to steal bits of cloth for their nests. It is strange to think of rats or squirrels knowingly sharing space with humans, but in winter the rules changed. Everyone sought warmth. Everyone became neighbours through necessity. You turn slightly and feel the bed frame creak under your hip. The movement stirs another presence, someone else lying near you. Perhaps a child or an older family member. Many winter nights in the Old West involved communal sleeping. Multiple people shared one bed or mattress to preserve heat. The practical choice slowly transformed into emotional comfort. A soft sigh next to you suggests another sleeper adjusting their weight under the heavy buffalo robe. Their warmth radiates toward you, creating a small bubble of shared heat. Your eyes trace the shadows and settle on the far stall partitioned by rough planks. Behind it lies the shape of something larger than a dog. A quiet exhale follows slow and deep. You realise a small calf or goat might be resting there. Families sometimes brought weaker livestock inside during intense cold. The warmth of the cabin kept them alive, and frankly, the warmth of the animals helped the humans survive too. You imagine waking to the soft, grassy smell of a sleepy calf, its nose touching the cold floor while it shifts closer to the wall. Your mind wanders to an odd little detail preserved in a few rural journals from the time. One farmer wrote that he used his cat as a living draft detector. If the cat settled repeatedly in the same part of the cabin, he knew that spot was the warmest. You glance toward the folded coat near the bed and half expect a cat to appear, stretching comfortably, knowing exactly where the heat pools. You lie still, listening again. The tiny claws of a mouse, the settling sigh of the dog, the distant rumble of an animal in the stall. Each sound interacts with the hum of the fire and the faint whistle from the window cracks. Winter nights did not offer silence. They offered a tapestry of soft life layered over the stillness. You consider for a moment how these shared spaces altered the meaning of home. Some researchers suggest that such closeness, even with animals and pests, created an unusual version of comfort. People knew they were not alone in their struggle against the cold, yet other writers question whether the constant presence of animals made rest more difficult. After all, mice scratching inside the walls could snap someone awake instantly, and the smell of livestock lingering in the room might overwhelm lighter sleepers. You lie on your back now and weigh both perspectives. You can imagine how both comfort and irritation lived side by side. You shift slightly, feeling the straw mattress adjust under your shoulder. The quilts fall softly across your chest. The dog in the cradle lifts its head again, sniffing the air. Perhaps it senses the mouse. Perhaps it simply feels the movement of the cabin. You give it a small whisper of reassurance, though the dog probably does not need it. It settles again, letting out a sleepy puff of breath. In the rafters above, another soft scurry travels from one beam to the next. The noise blends easily into the heavy darkness. Frontier families became accustomed to these nighttime companions. They recognized the sounds, understood which ones meant trouble and which ones simply meant life moving around them. Your eyes fall closed for a moment and you imagine the warmth of a calf resting only a few feet away. The presence of another warm body, even an animal, makes the cabin feel less isolated. The cold outside might be merciless, but inside this shared space, every creature contributes something to the fragile balance of winter survival. You inhale deeply. The air smells faintly of hay wool and smoke mixed with the earthy scent of the small dog. You exhale slowly. The warmth of the quilt settles more firmly against your ribs. You sink deeper, feeling the entire room breathe with you. Humans, animals, tiny rustling visitors, all sharing warmth in the same fragile shelter. The night stretches quietly, and you nestle deeper into your bedding, prepared for whatever other small sounds may rise as the long winter hours continue. You shift beneath the quilts, letting your senses drift toward the far side of the cabin, where the kitchen area folds into the shadows. Even in the low glow of the embers, you can make out shelves lined with jars, a table worn smooth by years of chopping, and an iron pot hanging above the hearth's lingering heat. Night in an Old West kitchen carries its own flavour, its own temperature, its own quiet presence. You inhale deeply. The air is thick with scents that have soaked into the wood over decades: smoke, dried herbs, onions kept through winter, and the faint sweetness of root vegetables stacked carefully for survival. You rise from the bed, pulling your shawl around your shoulders before padding across the uneven boards. The warmth disappears as you move away from the fire, replaced by a cool breath that clings to your ankles. Yet the kitchen draws you forward. Food storage and simmering pots were the heart of winter evenings, often offering comfort as real as the quilts behind you. Settler accounts often note that winter kitchens served as makeshift sleeping spaces because the proximity to the hearth made nights more bearable. You move toward the table and feel how the air shifts again, carrying the memory of earlier meals. You touch a wooden bowl resting at the edge of the table. Its surface is smooth, worn, almost silky by use. Frontier families used bowls like this for everything: porridge, stew, dried fruit, even storing small handfuls of nuts. You pick it up and bring it close. The scent that lingers inside is a mix of cooked cornmeal and smoked meat, a common combination described repeatedly in frontier letters. Food was simple, repetitive, and often dictated by what could survive long months of frost. You glance at the pot hanging over the coals. A faint steam rises, meandering lazily before vanishing in the cool air. Someone left something warming inside, just in case anyone woke hungry. You lift the lid slightly and see a thick broth still shimmering faintly. Root vegetables float near the top: carrot, turnip, maybe potato. In the old West winter kitchens, leftovers never sat long because every warm bite mattered. You lower the lid and let the soft scent of stew settle into your senses. It feels grounding, as though the very smell could warm your ribs. Your attention drifts to a row of onions braided together and hanging from a beam. Their papery skins whisper softly when you brush your fingers across them. Families stored onions for months this way, relying on them for flavour preservation and a surprising bit of practical magic. One old household note from the era mentions that some believed onions absorbed illness from the air. Whether or not that was true, the belief offered comfort when nights felt long and sickness lurked in the cold. You take one braid gently and let it sway back into place. On the corner of the table sits a block of hardened cheese wrapped in cloth. It feels cold to the touch, almost rock-like. Food changed texture in winter. Biscuits stiffened. Butter became so solid you had to chip pieces away rather than spread them. You tap the cheese lightly against the table and hear a dull thud. That sound alone tells you how frigid the room becomes when the fire rests low. A few steps to your right, a crate of apples sits beneath the window. The apples are wrinkled, some bruised, but still edible. Families often stored apples through winter, turning them into pie sauces or simple midnight snacks. You lift one and feel the cool weight in your palm. Its sweetness has condensed with age, and its scent is faint but comforting. You take a tentative bite. The fruit is soft, slightly grainy, and carries the faintest taste of summer preserved in a winter night. Your eyes drift toward the ceiling, where bundles of dried herbs hang from rafters. Sage, thyme, peppermint, perhaps yarrow, each bundle tied carefully with twine. The herbs sway when the wind presses against the cabin, releasing whispers of fragrance. These plants were used for everything: seasoning stew, making tea, soothing stomach aches, and perfuming the long, smoky nights. A few families even tucked bundles near bedding to help with sleep. You brush your fingers against one bundle and feel the leaves crumble softly. You step closer to the shelves where jars of preserved vegetables line the boards. Pickled cucumbers, beans, sealed in brine berries, turned into thick jam. The jars look like captured memories, small bright spots trapped behind frosted glass. Settlers depended on this supply through the coldest months when fresh food became a distant idea. You take one jar into your hands. The glass feels icy and faint frost creeps along its surface. You trace the cold pattern with your thumb, admiring the quiet beauty of it. Your attention shifts to a small cloth packet lying near the stove. You untie it gently and discover dried corn kernels inside. They rattle softly like tiny beads. Corn was a cornerstone of frontier life. It became bread mush fritters or thickening for soups. Without it, many families struggled through the winter. You hold a handful of the kernels, feeling their cold hardness, then let them slip back into the pouch. A faint oddity comes to mind. A few scattered reports mention that settlers sometimes place slices of smoked bacon on windowsills on especially cold nights to freeze them solid. The frozen pieces were easier to shave thinly for soups or stews. You imagine the sill here serving such a purpose. You glance toward the window and picture a row of bacon strips, stiff as small wooden planks. You turn toward the hearth again. The fire gives a low rumble, as if reminding you that the coals still need care. You crouch and stir them lightly, letting a new warmth rise through the kitchen. The room brightens just a little. Enough for shadows to recede from corners and reveal more details: a tin cup left from supper, a cloth drying near the stove, a knife resting beside a cutting board. All ordinary things, yet each contributes to the sense of a kitchen filled with life. Some researchers today suggest that winter kitchens acted almost like communal spaces for emotional refuge. The smells, the lingering warmth, the soft sounds of pots and coals created a psychological buffer against the harshness outside. Other writers question this idea, pointing out that smoky air, cramped spaces and cold drafts from storage areas may have made these rooms restless and uncomfortable. As you stand here, you sense both possibilities. The air is thick and smoky, yet the scent of stew touches you with a steady reassurance. You place your hand on the pot once more, feeling the gentle heat radiate through the metal. This warmth, though small, feels deeply human. It carries hope for tomorrow's breakfast, and the quiet promise that even in winter nourishment waits patiently. You turn back toward the bed, guided by the faint orange glow of the embers. The kitchen slowly fades into darkness behind you, but its scents remain. Smoke onions, dried herbs, root vegetables simmering quietly. They follow you into the quilts, like familiar companions as you settle into the long winter night. You settle back beneath the heavy quilts, but the kitchen scents cling to you like a gentle reminder of warmth. The fire has quieted again, its glow dimming into that deep red that barely reaches the farthest corners. In the darkness, your ears tune to the cabin more sharply. You hear the faint creaks, the subtle shifts in the rafters, the soft breathing of the dog curled somewhere near your feet. And then you notice it again, the sound of the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, creating its own strange music. It is not a steady howl. It rises, falls, turns, and curls with a life of its own. You lift your head slightly, letting your ears open to the soundscape around you. Winter wind in the Old West was never just noise. It shaped the feeling of the night. It slid through chinks between logs and created thin, wavering whistles that changed pitch with every gust. People described these sounds vividly in their letters. Some wrote of high notes that reminded them of distant flutes. Others mentioned low, mournful hums that seemed to vibrate under the floorboards. You listen now and hear both. A high whine flutters near the window and a deep rumble presses against the doorframe. You shift your weight and the straw tick rustles. The noise blends easily with the chorus of winter. The room feels alive in a quiet way, as if the entire cabin responds to the wind's touch. You reach your hand toward the wall. When your fingers meet the rough log surface, you feel a faint vibration. The wind does not just make sound, it moves the world around it. Even the tiny quiver of wood under your hand seems like a reminder that the cabin must endure forces much stronger than any person inside. Your eyes drift toward the window. The frost-coated glass captures the moonlight and reflects it into the room as faint silver streaks. The pattern of frost has grown thicker since earlier. Lace-like shapes spread across the pane, delicate yet cold enough to burn your fingertips if you touch them. Beyond that frosted layer you can see shadows shifting where the wind pushes snow from tree branches. Each gust carries thousands of tiny ice crystals, making a faint hiss as they brush the wooden walls. You imagine these small icy grains tapping like impatient fingers across the entire surface of the cabin. You lie back again, letting the quilts rise to your chin. The wind lifts suddenly outside, rushing around the cabin like a large invisible creature circling its territory. It finds every small space between logs, pushing air through them with surprising force. A soft, wavering whistle fills the room. You close your eyes and picture how families in the Old West must have listened to this every night, especially during long storms. One well-known farm journal described these whistling drafts as the winter's own lullaby, sometimes comforting, sometimes unsettling. Your toes find a warmer patch beneath the buffalo robe. You curl them there instinctively. The contrast between the cold air and the heat trapped beneath the covers sharpens your awareness. Winter nights were a constant negotiation between warmth and chill. Drafts that slipped through cracks could suddenly brush your cheek, making you pull the quilt up a little higher. You feel that now. A brief flutter of cold touches your forehead, just enough to make you shiver lightly. You shift again, and notice how the sound changes depending on your angle. With your head turned slightly left, you hear the wind whistle through the window frame. Turning slightly right, you hear a deeper tone vibrating from the corner where the wall meets the floor. These differing tones created a strange nightly symphony for families. Children often learned which sounds meant harmless wind, and which ones meant shifting snow or a looming storm. You listen carefully, learning the same distinctions by instinct. A small memory derived from early traveller notes rises in your thoughts. One writer described hearing the wind through cabin walls as if an invisible violinist played long trembling notes throughout the night. The comparison feels apt now. The sound swells and dips, almost musical, almost desperate. You let it wash over you. The rhythm of wind against wood ice against glass and snow shifting on the roof settles into your awareness. The fire behind you gives a faint pop, startling you gently. Sparks shift under the ash, but no new flame rises. That little sound brightens the cabin's atmosphere for a second, then dissolves back into the steady hum of the wind. You wonder how many nights settlers spent listening to fire and storm measure each other, each trying to outlast the other. One offered warmth, the other tested the walls. It is strange how you can feel both forces from your place under the quilts. You shift your hand toward the edge of the bed and feel the cold beam supporting it. The wood is freezing to the touch, almost painful. The wind outside wails again, shaking the shutters lightly. You pull your hand back and tuck it beneath the buffalo robe. A moment later you hear a soft scurry near the grain bag. The mouse again. Its tiny claws make rapid tapping sounds as it darts across the floor, then stops. Even the mouse seems to listen to the wind for a moment before continuing its search for warmth and crumbs. You glance toward the roof as another sound trickles down. Snow slides slowly from the peak, dragging small patches of ice with it. It creates a gentle scraping noise, like someone brushing a broom across shingles. The noise softens as it reaches the edge of the roof, then becomes silence again. Many frontier families wrote that these sounds of shifting snow often woke them during the cold months. You listen to it with quiet curiosity rather than fear. A deeper sound follows almost like a low hum. The wind presses against the roof beams, creating a strange resonance. Some modern scholars have suggested that cabins amplified wind tones in a unique way, turning gusts into almost musical frequencies. Others argue that the effect varied wildly depending on how well the cabin was built. As you lie here now, feeling the low hum vibrate faintly through the wood, you can imagine both views holding truth. The sound neither comforts nor alarms you. It simply becomes part of the moment. You adjust your position once more, rolling onto your side. The quilts slide against your arm, making a soft whispering sound. The dog near the cradle stirs at the movement, then settles again, breathing slowly. Even its breath becomes part of the room's atmosphere. Warm, rhythmic, familiar. You appreciate how every living creature inside the cabin adds a quiet counterbalance to the wind's restless voice. A sudden gust rushes against the window, strong enough to make the frost shift slightly on the glass. The hiss that follows is sharp, crisp, almost slicing through the room's warmth. You picture the world outside, snow swirling in circles, branches bending under the force drifts piling higher against the cabin walls. You take a slow breath, feeling grateful for the layers of quilts wrapped around you. As the wind settles again, you focus on the quieter details. A soft tapping near the ceiling. Perhaps a loose piece of bark on the roof. A faint flutter of dried herbs hanging from a rafter. A slow creak as the cabin adjusts to changes in temperature. All these microsounds weave together, forming a winter soundtrack that families once memorized out of sheer repetition. You sink deeper into the bedding, letting the soundscape lull your mind. The wind whistles gently now, as if calming down after a moment of intensity. The room grows quieter, though not silent. The soft red glow from the embers paints faint patterns on the wall. You relax your hands, loosen your shoulders, and allow your breath to steady. For all the chill and all the noise, there is something almost soothing in this interplay of wind and wood. The cabin is holding firm. The fire still breathes. The darkness listens. You close your eyes and let the night's music carry you forward into the next quiet stretch of winter. You lie still for a few moments, letting the fading wind settle into the corners of the cabin again. The quilts feel heavy and warm against your chest, but the air above them still bites faintly at your cheeks. You shift one hand outside the covers and instantly regret it. The chill grips your fingers like a slow, tightening clasp. You pull your hand back in quickly and let the warmth reclaim it. That tiny moment reminds you of something every old West winter sleeper knew instinctively: undressing was a luxury that bitter nights simply did not allow. You rise from the bed carefully, the buffalo robe sliding down your shoulders as you push yourself upright. Your breath drifts in front of you in a pale cloud, dissolving long before it reaches the far side of the room. You step toward the wooden peg on the wall where a thick wool shirt hangs. The shirt is stiff with cold, the fibres almost frozen into position. You rub your thumb along its edge and feel how the fabric bends reluctantly. On nights like this, people simply slept in what they wore during the day. Removing layers meant facing cold air so sharp it could make your skin ache in seconds. You reach for a pair of wool trousers draped over a crate. The fabric is rough, the interior patched again and again with scraps of softer material. A handful of frontier journals mention that families kept one set of thick winter clothing specifically for nighttime use. These garments became like personal cocoons that retained body heat long after fires died down. You hold the trousers against your chest for a moment, letting them warm slightly, then lay them neatly beside the bed in case you need them later. Your eyes drift toward a thick undershirt folded near the hearth. Not clean, not soft, but warmer than almost anything else in the cabin. In regions where winters were especially harsh, families often slept in multiple undershirts layered beneath their main clothes. You pinch the fabric between your fingers. It feels dense and slightly oily from years of wear. The smell of smoke clings to it. You drape it gently across the foot of the bed, imagining how comforting its weight must feel when the cold tries to seep through every crack in the walls. You look toward the small shelf where mittens rest. They are made of scraps of wool sewn together with simple stitches. Some families wore mittens in bed to prevent fingers from numbing in the night. You slide a hand into one mitten now and feel its rough lining. The wool scratches lightly against your skin, but it promises warmth. You leave one mitten nearby, thinking of how someone might slip it on instinctively during a frigid half-awake moment. Near the floor you notice a long woolen scarf. It is frayed on both ends, thin in the middle and patched in places. Yet when you lift it, the material holds a surprising warmth. Settlers often wrapped scarves loosely around their faces while they slept, to keep icy draughts from biting at their noses and lips. You place the scarf near your pillow. The idea of wrapping your face against the cold feels strangely inviting after experiencing the sharp air near the windows. A faint memory from an old settler's letter flickers in your mind. She wrote that on the worst nights the entire family slept wearing their coats, hats, and even thin gloves. She noted that taking off clothing felt like letting the winter win. You imagine yourself settling into bed fully dressed, your hat pulled low, your coat wrapped tight, your boots resting close but not too cold to wear. The image seems odd by modern standards, yet when the temperature indoors hovered barely above freezing, such choices were practical. You walk slowly toward the window. Frost creeps across the inside pane in delicate branching patterns. You touch the glass lightly and immediately pull back. The cold stings your fingertip. You blow warm breath across the frost but see little effect. Heat dissipates instantly. This helps you understand why undressing before bed felt almost unthinkable. Even the smallest exposure to cold stole warmth your body could not afford to lose. You notice a shirt hanging near the hearth again. Its sleeves are stiff and the collar has hardened slightly from moisture freezing. Families often hung clothing near the fire overnight to dry or thaw. You lift the shirt gingerly. It is warm in some places, cold in others. You feel how inconsistent heating creates a strange mix of textures. Some parts of the fabric become soft and pliable, while others remain stiff and cold. You place it back gently and watch a small wisp of steam rise from a damp corner. You turn toward the foot of the bed and see a pair of wool socks patched nearly to the point of unrecognizability. Socks were often layered at night, sometimes 2 or 3 pairs at once. You pick up one thick sock and slip your thumb inside. The inner wool feels coarse but retains heat remarkably well. A farm journal once described socks as a winter sleeper's first defense and last comfort. You understand why. Cold floors could numb feet so quickly that people tiptoed across boards trying to minimize contact with the icy wood. As you adjust the socks on the bed, a small memory from a frontier anecdote surfaces. Some families heated rocks near the fire, wrapped them in cloth and tucked them at the foot of their beds. Others warmed bricks or flat stones under their clothing before lying down. One writer even claimed that slipping heated stones into winter boots helped make the next morning less punishing. You picture yourself tucking a warm stone under the layer of socks, letting its heat seep upward. A low creak from the roof interrupts your thoughts. Snow shifts again, and a cold gust presses through a small gap between logs. You feel it brush across your arm. It sends a wave of goosebumps up your skin. You quickly pull your coat around your shoulders, savouring the warmth it traps against your chest. The coat is heavy, scratchy, and smells of horses and smoke, yet its weight feels reassuring. You step toward the bed and sit down again. The buffalo robe envelops you as you pull it upward. The dog in the cradle stirs, sensing your movement, then settles again. As you tuck the scarf near your chin, you feel safer protected inside your layers. It is almost like becoming part of the bedding itself. A few researchers have pointed out that winter clothing doubled almost as security blankets during harsh frontier nights. The weight, the warmth, the familiarity created a cocoon that helped people sleep in unforgiving conditions. Others argue that wearing so many layers must have made rest uncomfortable, perhaps even restricting movement. As you lie down fully clothed, you sense both realities. The warmth comforts you immediately. The heaviness presses gently across your ribs. You adjust your coat, pull the scarf near your cheek, tuck the thick socks close to your feet, and let the quilts drape over everything. The mix of clothing and bedding forms a protective shell. You exhale slowly, the warmth gathering around your face. Outside, the wind begins to rise again, brushing against the cabin with a lonely moan. Inside, wrapped in wool fur and the thick shadows of winter night, you lean deeper into the warmth you have built for yourself. You lie there for a moment, wrapped in layers of wool, and hide the warmth of your clothing, slowly blending with the heat beneath the quilts. The fire glows faintly behind you, a soft red pulse that barely reaches across the room. You feel yourself drifting, yet a subtle awareness tugs at the edge of your thoughts. It is the same awareness families in the Old West carried through. Every winter night someone will need to wake, someone will need to tend the fire, someone will need to listen for changes in the weather. Sleep in this world did not arrive in one long, peaceful stretch. It came in intervals broken into shared responsibilities that moved through the cabin like a slow rotation. You sit up carefully, letting the quilts fall away. The cold greets you again, brushing against your neck and slipping between fibres of your clothing. You rub your arms as you walk toward the hearth. The coals glow, but the surface has dulled under a layer of ash. You kneel beside them and blow gently. A faint spark brightens, then fades. You take a thin piece of kindling and push it deeper into the embers. It catches slowly, then glows bright enough to cast a warm shimmer across the floorboards. You sit back on your heels, feeling the tension ease from your shoulders. Families often divided the night into 2 or 3 segments, each sleeper, taking turns to rise and protect the fragile warmth inside the cabin. Many frontier letters mention this practice as if it were as ordinary as breathing. You imagine how parents nudged each other awake with whispers, "Your turn," or how older children took pride in tending the fire without waking anyone else. You can picture a teenager pulling on a coat, stumbling sleepily across the cabin, coaxing the embers back to life while half dreaming of spring. You lift the poker and gently turn a larger log into position. The sudden rush of sparks lights up the room briefly. The dog stirs in its cradle but settles again. You can hear the faint scrape of tiny claws in the rafters as some small creature rearranges itself. The cabin feels like a living thing whose heartbeat depends on the fire you just fed. You rise and stretch quietly, then walk toward the window. Frost thickens the glass in new places. Your breath fogs it slightly. You wipe a circle with your sleeve and look outside. The night is still heavy with snow, the ground covered in pale ridges shaped by the wind. The moon hides behind clouds, casting only the barest glow. This is the hour when the world feels suspended as if it forgot how to move. You listen closely. A faint rhythmic thumping catches your attention. The stable. Someone will need to check on the animals before long. You wrap your coat around you tighter. Families took turns stepping into the frigid air to make sure livestock had water, or to push snow away from the door of the shed. You picture yourself opening the cabin door, the cold rushing in like a physical force gripping your lungs. You imagine trudging through knee-deep snow toward the stable lantern in hand, checking for the soft breaths of horses, or the shifting weight of a cow that needs hay pushed closer. You return your gaze to the cabin. The room is dim but familiar. A cradle lightly creaks. A quilt rustles. Someone turns in their sleep. All these sounds blend into a quiet symphony. These were the moments shared sleepers recognized instinctively. Whoever stirred did so with purpose. No one slept so deeply that they forgot the night's tasks. You step toward the bed again and sit on its edge. The straw tick shifts beneath you with a muted crunch. This bed has known countless nights of interrupted sleep. Children woke, frightened by wind. Mothers woke to soothe them. Fathers woke to tend livestock. Older siblings took turns feeding the fire. Sometimes everyone slept lightly, listening for the signs of a storm rolling in. Other times the wind died down so completely that silence itself became the thing that woke them. You adjust your coat and lie back down. The quilt settles heavily over your chest, its warmth rising quickly, despite the chill lingering around its edges. A strange detail from an old rural diary flickers in your thoughts. The writer explained that some families held a ritual of passing a warm stone from sleeper to sleeper during night watch periods. When someone woke to check the fire, they took the stone from the previous person and returned it after completing their task. It acted as both a source of heat and a silent acknowledgement of shared responsibility. You imagine the smooth surface of such a stone resting against your palm, radiating faint heat, while you carry it through the dark. You nestle deeper into the bedding, letting the layers close around you. The dog near your feet shifts and resettles. The warmth of its small body is noticeable, a subtle reminder that you are not alone in this shared night. You hear a faint exhale from the other side of the room, someone releasing a soft sigh as they roll onto their side. You remain awake only moments longer before sleep tugs at your awareness again. The fire crackles softly, its glow dim but steady. The cabin creaks gently as the wind shifts. Your body sinks deeper into the warmth, your breath slowing. Soon, another sleeper will rise, shuffle toward the hearth, and keep the night's rhythm moving. You let your thoughts drift into that slow pattern, now knowing the night does not belong to one person alone. It belongs to everyone resting inside this small wooden shelter, each dream broken gently by duty, each waking softened by warmth. You lie still for another long moment, listening to the steady breathing around you. The quilts rise and fall with your own slow breaths, creating a tiny cocoon of warmth in the frigid room. You know your turn will come again because winter nights in the Old West never allowed uninterrupted sleep. But this time the task waiting for you is different. A shift in the wind, a distant sound outside, or an instinct carried from generations before nudges you gently awake. You open your eyes, push the buffalo robe aside, and let the cold brush your cheeks as you sit up. You walk toward the door in slow, careful steps, your wool socks barely whispering across the floorboards. The air near the entrance feels especially sharp, as though the giant winter outside presses its face close, waiting for a crack to slip through. Your fingers hesitate over the latch. There is no rushing this moment. Nighttime trips outside required a quiet steadiness. You grip the metal, which feels cold enough to sting, then lift the latch with a soft click. You pull the door open, just a crack. A gust of icy air leaps into the room instantly. It slips under your collar and races down your spine. You widen the opening just enough to step through, then close the door behind you, until only a sliver of cabin light remains. The moment the door shuts completely, the world changes. The cold hits you like a full body shock. It wraps around your arms, crawls up your sleeves, and bites at your eyelashes. You breathe in slowly and feel the air scrape your throat. You stand still until your eyes adjust to the silver-washed darkness. Snow stretches in every direction, soft and deep. The moon hides behind a veil of clouds, turning everything into pale shapes and soft shadows. You take your first step. The snow crunches loudly beneath your boots, the sound echoing strangely in the frozen air. Some early frontier travellers described nighttime snow as almost musical underfoot. You hear that now, a rhythmic crackling that accompanies every shift in your weight. You lift your lantern high. Its dim flame trembles in the wind, casting a small circle of light that wavers over the ground. You move toward the well first. It stands like a dark silhouette against the pale earth. Families often check their wells at night because winter could freeze the surface, suddenly trapping what little water remained accessible. You approach the wooden frame and brush snow away from the rope coiled near the top. Frost glitters along the beam, catching the lantern light. You bend and peer inside. The faint shine of water reflects back at you. A thin crust has begun forming near the edge, but not enough to stop a morning draw. You exhale with relief. You turn away from the well and make your way toward the barn or lean to where animals sleep. The walk feels slow because every step sinks deep into the snow. Your coat stiffens with the cold and the wind tugs at its edges. You pull it tighter around your chest as your breath forms thick clouds that vanish almost instantly. As you approach the structure, a soft sound reaches your ears. A horse shifting its weight. A cow letting out a gentle, sleepy grunt. Even the animals recognize your presence. They know the rhythmic pattern of night checks the sound of the boots, crunching toward them, the familiar glow of a lantern bobbing through the dark. Watching over animals in the night was not only practical, it helped maintain the fragile sense of control over winter's unpredictability. You step into the small shelter and lower your lantern. The warm breath of the animals greets you like a soft fog. Their bodies radiate heat that contrasts sharply with the icy wind outside. You place a hand against a horse's flank. Its fur feels thick and dry warm beneath the surface. You murmur something softly, not to speak clearly, but simply to share presence. The horse shifts slightly, then calms. You check its water bucket. A layer of ice has already formed. You break it gently with a stick and swirl the water until the surface moves freely again. You move to the next animal, then the next. Their breath puffs into the air like tiny clouds. You hear the soft rustling of hay under their hooves, the quiet contentment of a herd that trusts your careful movements. You step back for a moment and take in the scene. This night ritual, repeated across countless winter seasons, anchored families emotionally. Some researchers suggest that tending animals in the frozen dark helped remind settlers they were not alone in the vast silence of winter. Others argue that such tasks increased the stress of frontier life by interrupting much-needed rest. Standing here now, you sense a mixture of both. The weight of duty rests on your shoulders, yet the steady breathing of the animals softens something in your chest. After ensuring everything's in order, you step back into the open night. The cold immediately resumes its grip. The landscape looks even more ethereal now. Snowdrifts shimmer faintly in the lantern's glow. You turn toward the cabin. From here it appears small and fragile against the stretch of winter. A warm dot of darkness surrounded by an ocean of frost. You start the walk back. Your boots crunch rhythmically. The wind brushes against your face, carrying whispers of trees shifting far away. You tilt your head and listen. Sometimes the wind mimics voices or distant footsteps. Many settlers noted this eerie effect, describing how nighttime air vibrated in unexpected ways. Some felt comforted, believing the sounds were simply the world settling. Others felt uneasy, guessing the noise signaled approaching storms. Your footsteps quicken. You reach the door and lift the latch again with careful hands. The warmth inside meets you the moment you step through, though it feels faint compared to the biting cold outside. You close the door firmly and rub your arms, letting your body thaw slowly. The dog stirs. Someone in the bed shifts. The fire glows quietly in the hearth, still alive. You move toward it, warming your hands briefly before slipping back into the bed. The quilts rise to your chin. Your body remembers the cold, but also remembers the warmth waiting beneath the layers. As you settle again, the night resumes its rhythm. Your turn is finished. Someone else will rise later. You exhale softly, and let your breath blend with the quiet hum of the cabin. The wind outside carries on, but inside your little world, warmth gathers once more around you. You ease back beneath the quilts, letting the warmth reclaim you after the brutal cold outside. Your body hums softly as sensation returns to your fingers and toes. The fire glows gently, the coals pulsing in a slow rhythm. You lie still and pay attention to the smallest details around you. It is then that you notice the faint glimmer at the edge of the quilt near your shoulder. You lift the corner slightly and see it tiny crystals sparkling like dusted sugar, clinging to the fabric in delicate constellations. Frost formed from your own breath, settling and freezing on contact. This small shimmering line feels beautiful in a strange way. Frontier journals often describe waking to such thin rims of frost on quilt edges, windowsills, and even the tips of mustaches. The cold air inside a winter cabin made every breath visible and every exhale a sculpture of ice. You watch your next breath rise in a soft cloud drifting upward until it gathers briefly near the rafters. You pull the buffalo robe closer. Its thickness traps heat quickly. But this time you pay attention to the other sensations, the cold seeping through the mattress beneath you, the sharp draft brushing your cheek from a crack in the wall, and the quiet hiss of wind slipping along the roof. Every sensory detail reminds you that warmth in this space exists in fragile layers, not in abundance. You adjust your shoulders beneath the robe and glance around the dim cabin. The walls capture faint silver reflections from the frost on the windows. You can see the breath of the dog curled in its cradle rising in tiny puffs. In the far corner, a faint shimmer on a wooden beam reveals a patch of ice that has crept inward during the coldest hours. Such intrusions were common. Families sometimes woke to find their water buckets crusted with ice, their bread hardened into cold slabs, or their beards frozen to their blankets. You move slightly, and the frost on your quilt cracks in thin, delicate lines. The sound is almost like the faintest whisper. You run a finger along the frozen edge. It feels brittle like powdered glass. You brush it away gently, and tiny flakes fall into the darkness. You're struck by how such a beautiful detail could coexist with such harsh discomfort. Your breath deepens and you become aware of how the cold changes the way your body feels. Your lungs expand more cautiously. Your muscles stay slightly tensed as if bracing. Winter sleep in the Old West was not the loose, sprawling sleep of warm seasons. It was tight, curled, protective. People instinctively kept themselves small to preserve heat. You shift into a curled position now, tucking your knees closer, feeling the warmth grow more concentrated near your core. A low creak comes from the rafters above you. It sounds almost like a long sigh. The wooden beams expand and contract with every temperature shift, and the sound can feel strangely alive. You listen as a soft patter follows, snowflakes falling through minute gaps or brushing the roof as the wind shifts. Settlers described hearing these delicate noises at night and taking comfort in them. They were reminders that storms moved, drifted and changed, even if the cold remained constant. You glance toward the window. Frost flowers bloom across its surface, branching in elegant patterns. You rise just enough to look closer. The designs resemble feathers, ferns and twisting vines. This natural artwork forms silently overnight, shaped by the humidity of breath, the cold air outside and the warmth rising from the fire. You place your hand an inch from the pane. The cold radiating from it feels intense, almost like standing beside a frozen lake at night. You imagine a child waking to these patterns and tracing them with a fingertip before a fire was lit. You shift your weight again and hear another sound. The faint snap of hair stiffened with cold. It surprises you how easily winter touches everything, even your own body. Some families wrote of children waking with frost on their eyebrows, or strands of hair frozen lightly to the edge of a quilt. You rub your temple and imagine such mornings. As you settle back down, you sense something else, the subtle smell of cold. It is not a scent most people think of today, but here it has a distinct presence, crisp metallic with a hint of dampness. The cold carries aromas differently. Wood smoke becomes sharper, wool smells earthier, even your breath feels tinged with something bright and icy. Your thoughts drift briefly to old discussions among researchers about whether frontier cabins could truly trap warmth effectively. Some argued that with heavy quilts, steady fires and layered clothing, people slept warmly enough. Others insisted that frost inside the cabin was proof of constant exposure to cold. As you lie here now, feeling both the tight warmth under your covers and the biting chill whispering across your forehead, you understand why such debates endure. Winter in these cabins offered comfort and discomfort in equal parts. A soft rustle near your feet draws your attention. The dog shifts, curling more tightly into its little nest. Its fur catches faint bits of frost from the air. You reach down and gently brush your hand across its back. The warmth beneath its fur radiates up your arm. For a moment, you feel deeply connected to every creature sharing the room. All of you breathing, generating heat, contributing to the fragile climate of the cabin. Then the frost catches your eye again. A faint glimmer at the seam of the quilt. You reach for it, feeling its delicate texture crumble under your fingertip. It reminds you how thin the barrier is between warmth and cold. How every exhale becomes part of the environment. How winter enters without asking permission. You close your eyes once more. The frost remains near your cheek. The cold brushes your skin lightly. The quilts weigh down gently on your chest. You inhale deeply. The air feels sharp but manageable. The cabin creaks, the wind hums, and the frost grows in tiny shifting patterns. You let these sensations wrap around you, settling deeper into the quiet, glittering world of a frontier night, where even the smallest breath shapes the winter landscape inside your home. You rest quietly beneath the quilts for a few breaths longer, letting the frost settle on the fabric while the fire whispers behind you. The warmth under the buffalo robe begins to grow steady again, but your mind drifts toward another part of frontier winter life that stirred the cabin at unexpected hours. Guests, travellers, neighbours who arrived without warning because the cold outside left them no other choice. In the Old West, hospitality was not an option. It was survival itself. You push the heavy layers away and sit up slowly. The room is dim, lit only by the faint glow of embers and a thin trace of moonlight seeping through the frosted window. You imagine a knock at the door right now, a tired hand, perhaps trembling from exhaustion, striking the wood softly. The idea fills the cabin almost instantly. You rise and step toward the door as if answering such a call. You pause, hand over the latch. You picture a weary figure standing outside, clothes dusted with snow breath hanging in the air like smoke. Maybe a ranch hand who misjudged the storm. Maybe a family friend returning late from town. Maybe even a stranger whose horse faltered on the trail. Diaries from the era often mention that anyone caught in a winter storm could not be turned away. To refuse warmth was to risk a death on your conscience. That belief shaped the unwritten rules of night hospitality. You open the door slightly, just enough to let the imagined guest inside. You see them lower their head, brushing snow from their shoulders, stomping their boots to shake off the cold. You feel the gust of icy air swirl into the cabin, pushing against your ankles like an unwelcome spirit. You close the door quickly and guide them toward the fire. The warmth envelops them slowly the way it did for you earlier. You can almost hear the sigh of relief they release as their fingers thaw. You gesture toward the bed or the bench near the hearth. Space is tight, but winter generosity was never measured in square inches. People made room because the cold demanded it. You adjust blankets, pull quilts aside, and arrange buffalo hides so the newcomer can settle. The dog in the cradle lifts its head, sniffing the new scent in the room, then puts its head back down as if accepting the arrival without question. You step back for a moment, watching how the visitor warms their hands over the hearth. Their breath forms pale clouds that drift toward the ceiling before fading. You sense how deeply winter exhaustion settles into a person. Frozen fingers, stiff clothes, heavy limbs, even their voice might come out roughened by cold. You picture them asking quietly whether they can sleep here for the night, and you hear yourself answering with a simple yes. You return to the bed, making a space at one side. Frontier families often slept shoulder to shoulder when guests arrived. This practice appears frequently in handwritten letters from the time. One writer joked that winter forced everyone into the same nest, whether they liked each other or not. Yet beneath the humour lies a real truth. Body heat shared in a small cabin meant survival. You lift a corner of the robe and gesture for the traveller to join. They remove their stiff coat, brushing frost from the collar. They lower themselves carefully onto the straw, tick wincing, when a stray stalk pokes them through the fabric. You hand them an extra quilt, rough but warm. Their fingers tremble slightly as they pull it close. You feel the bed shift beneath you, the straw crunching softly as weight redistributes. You lie back and let the warmth of the room rise slowly. The new presence changes the atmosphere subtly. More heat, more breath, more life. It becomes easier to ignore the cold pressing against the walls. Your mind drifts to one of the smaller accounts preserved from a homestead in Wyoming. The writer described how during a fierce storm 12 people shared a single room for 2 full nights. Some slept upright in chairs, some lay on the floor near the hearth, others squeezed into the bed so tightly that turning over required cooperation. She laughed about it in her letter, but she also noted how the shared warmth made the nights bearable. You think of her now and smile softly at the thought. Your travelling guest settles deeper into the quilts and murmurs a quiet thank you. Their voice is hoarse from cold. You nod gently, even though this gesture exists only in your imagination. You sense their gratitude as if they truly occupy the space beside you. The dog breathes deeply again. The wind outside presses a long sigh against the cabin wall. A small memory from local folklore drifts into your thoughts. In some regions, people believed that unexpected guests on winter nights brought luck. They said a warm hearth and a shared blanket pleased whatever spirits watched the frontier. Whether the idea sprang from kindness or superstition, it encouraged generosity. You glance toward the window, half expecting to see the frost patterns shift in silent approval. You feel the warmth of the robed traveller close to you, and the shared presence makes the cold seem less threatening. You think of the unwritten etiquette that shaped these encounters. Guests removed their boots but kept their socks, and sometimes their coats. They spoke softly, so as not to wake the house. In return, hosts offered broth, a warm corner near the fire, or a place under a heavy hide. Even strangers slept inches from one another, trusting quietly in the fragile peace of the moment. Your thoughts wander to the ongoing discussions among scholars about how common such spontaneous winter hospitality really was. Some researchers believe it happened frequently, especially in remote areas where survival needs overpowered social boundaries. Others suggest that hospitality varied widely depending on local customs, resources, and trust levels. As you lie here now with your imagined guest warming beneath the quilts, you sense how necessity erased hesitation. When life outside the door froze in place, the cabin became a refuge for anyone who reached it. You shift slightly, creating a small pocket of heat under your shoulder. The bed creaks softly. The traveller moves too, adjusting their weight, creating a new sound that blends into the quiet night. You realise that even someone's breathing becomes part of the soundscape of winter hospitality. You hear their steady inhales mixing with your own. You feel the subtle warmth radiating from their body. You sense the gratitude settling in the air like a faint glow. The dog curls closer to your feet. Its warmth spreads like a slow-blooming ember. You tug the quilts a little higher and let the combined heat settle around your chest. Outside, the wind resumes brushing lightly at the wooden walls. The cabin groans in response, but the presence of another human body shifts the balance inside. You feel less alone, more anchored, more connected to the long, unbroken chain of people who once opened their doors to travellers on frozen nights. You close your eyes. The frost glimmers faintly at your shoulder. The fire hums. The traveller breathes quietly beside you. The dog shifts again. Winter for a moment rests at the threshold instead of entering, and you return to sleep warmed by the gentle, fragile gift of shared company. You lie quietly, the warmth of shared company still lingering in the air. The traveller beside you breathes steadily, the dog curled at your feet, shifts softly, and the fire hums with a faint glow. Yet even with all of this comforting presence, you feel something deeper moving through the room. A heaviness that does not come from quilts or buffalo robes. A stillness that sits in the corners and waits. You sense it now, the atmosphere frontier families often described as winter's long shadow settling across the mind. You adjust your position, careful not to disturb anyone. The straw mattress rustles under you. You inhale slowly, letting the cold edge of the room fill your lungs. In a moment like this, when the night grows deeper, and each breath feels weightier, you begin to understand how the relentless winter shaped the emotions of people who lived inside these cabins. You look toward the window where frost spreads like quiet vines across the glass. The patterns have thickened again. Moonlight filters faintly through them, illuminating the room with a metallic sheen. It is beautiful, but it also creates a sense of isolation. Everything outside is cold, silent, and distant. Even the nearest neighbour might be miles away. You wrap your coat tighter around your chest, acknowledging the quiet truth that winter nights often brought a swirl of emotions no one openly spoke about. A memory from handwritten frontier letters rises gently in your mind. Settlers described how the long darkness and unending cold made time feel heavy. Daylight was brief and sometimes grey. Nights stretched endlessly with only chores and quiet breathing to mark the hours. You feel that now. The night lies thick against the cabin walls as though hours are moving through molasses. You wonder how many families once lay awake like this, thinking of spring of warmth, of green plains they could barely remember under the weight of snow. You shift your head slightly on the pillow and listen to the fire. The faint crackle offers a fragile reassurance. The warm corners of the cabin feel welcoming enough. Yet your thoughts drift beyond warmth into deeper territory. Winter was not only physically exhausting, it pressed on the mind. Families lived in tight quarters for months, unable to wander, far unable to work the land, unable to break the routine of survival. It was a season of necessary patience. You turn your gaze toward the traveller beside you. Their presence is comforting, yet you imagine the thoughts that may have followed them through the storm before arriving. Loneliness, worry, hope, fear of getting lost in the white silence outside. Being stuck in the open plains during winter nights created a kind of mental strain that crept slowly into a person's bones. You imagine how relieved they must feel now, surrounded by a warm hide and the faint smell of stew still lingering in the air. You rest your hand on your own chest, feeling the rise and fall of your breath. Each inhale reminds you that you are safe for now. Each exhale carries a sense of release. You let the patterns of breathing settle into a rhythm, though you can still sense the psychological weight of the long winter night. You recall an old farm journal where a homesteader wrote that winter felt like being pressed between thick pages of a book. Time seemed slower, emotions, heavier conversations, quieter. People found themselves thinking about things they rarely considered during the busy seasons, lost memories, old regrets, distant family unfulfilled dreams. Winter gave space for reflection, but also made the mind vulnerable. You feel the edges of that introspection now. The cabin creaks suddenly, a long, low sound that stretches through the rafters. You turn your head slightly. The noise echoes in the quiet. You listen closely. It is only the wood reacting to the cold, but in winter silence even familiar sounds carry emotional weight. Some frontier families believed that the house itself reacted to their moods. If someone felt anxious, the cabin seemed to groan more loudly. If the family laughed during the evening, the wind outside seemed less harsh. You smile faintly at the memory of such simple superstitions, yet you feel a small warmth in how these beliefs made cold nights less lonely. You shift again beneath the buffalo robe. The weight presses against your chest and hips, grounding you. You focus on the warmth seeping into your skin. The combination of hide quilts clothing and shared body heat creates a sense of shelter that no words can fully capture. Yet even this comfort cannot entirely erase the psychological demands of winter. You lift your eyes to the ceiling. The darkness up there feels deeper than anywhere else in the room. You imagine the thoughts that rose in the minds of children lying awake in the loft. Stories whispered to each other, questions about the world, worries about frost wolves, snowstorms, or the quiet strain on their parents' faces. Winter shaped children too. It created a landscape of imagination and apprehension. You try to picture their wide eyes watching frost thicken on the rafters. You listen carefully. The wind has softened again, replaced by a gentle hush outside. Sometimes settlers wrote that the quietest nights were the worst for their minds. Noise at least kept the cabin connected to the world. Silence amplified every thought. You feel that silence rising around you now, thick, heavy, patient. Yet it does not frighten you. It simply highlights the contrast between the outer world and the fragile warmth inside. You shift the quilt slightly, allowing a bit of cool air to brush your arm. The sensation is sharp but manageable. It reminds you of how thin the line is between comfort and discomfort in this place. Winter's hold is always present, even in small touches. Then a softer memory enters the cabin, one that floats gently across your thoughts. Some families used quiet nighttime conversations to cope with the isolation of winter. They whispered, so as not to wake others, shared stories, or confided their worries. You imagine leaning slightly toward the traveller beside you and exchanging a few quiet words. Nothing urgent, just simple human connection to ease the weight of the long night's loneliness. Another detail from research arises in your thoughts. Some scholars note that winter isolation forged strong emotional resilience in frontier families. Others argue that it created moments of deep strain, sometimes leaving people restless or anxious. As you lie here now experiencing the layered quiet, you can imagine how both sides hold truth. Winter forced people inward, both physically and mentally, shaping emotions in subtle, unseen ways. You let your breath slow again. You feel the warmth of the traveller's back near yours. You hear the steady breathing of the dog. You sense the faint glowing comfort of the fire. Little by little, the emotional weight softens. The cabin feels smaller but safer. The frost seems less intrusive. The night seems a shade less heavy. You pull the buffalo robe slightly higher, nestling deeper into the warm shadows of the room. You let the thoughts of winter's psychological weight drift like slow snowflakes, settling gently until they dissolve into quiet stillness. Inside this fragile shelter of wood and warmth, you close your eyes once more, letting the night carry you toward a softer moment of rest. You rest in the quiet, letting the heaviness of winter nights settle around you like another thick blanket. The fire glows in a faint cradle of red, offering just enough warmth to keep the room from sinking into complete frost. As you inhale, the air feels dry and cold in your throat. You exhale, and your breath drifts upward like a small cloud. Your body longs for deeper sleep, yet your mind drifts toward the objects tucked along the shelf near the hearth. Jars, pouches, small bundles of herbs, and a squat tin cup stained by countless brews. These are the quiet remedies of winter nights, the mixtures people leaned on when cold made their bones ache, or when sleep struggled to come. You shift beneath the quilts and finally rise careful not to wake the traveller beside you. You pad across the floor, your socks brushing gently against rough boards. The fire gives off a soft crackle as you approach. On the small shelf above the hearth sit the simple tools of frontier nighttime comfort. A bit of dried mint, a pinch of willow bark, some grains of coarse sugar from the last summer's supplies. These items were never luxuries. They were survival companions. You take the tin cup into your hands. It feels cool at first, then warms slowly with your touch. You set it near the glowing coals and pour a bit of water from the kettle that rests beside the hearth. The water gives off thin tendrils of steam. You add dried mint leaves to the cup, letting them unfurl in the heat. This simple drink was one of the most common calming remedies on winter nights. Many families wrote that mint tea soothed the stomach, eased tension, and helped them drift back to rest after tending the fire or checking the animals. You lift the cup to your nose. The scent is soft but bright, a refreshing contrast to the heavy smell of smoke lingering in the cabin. You sip slowly, letting the warmth spread through your chest. The effect is gentle, but you feel your shoulders loosen. A faint calm settles in your body. You glance along the shelf again and notice small bundles of dried herbs tied with twine. One smells of chamomile, another of spruce tips. A curious one carries the sharp scent of cloves. A few diaries from frontier families mention that cloves steeped in hot water helped clear the sinuses when the cold made breathing feel tight. You take one cluster in your hand, feeling its crisp, brittle leaves break softly under your fingertips. It seems almost miraculous that these plants gathered months earlier could bring comfort in the dead of winter. You notice a jar containing dark, thick liquid. It is honey, though hardened by the cold. Frontier households valued honey not just as food, but as a soothing balm for sore throats. You open the jar carefully. The honey inside shines faintly in the firelight. You scrape a small amount onto your fingertip and taste it. Sweet, slightly grainy, comforting. The flavour lingers in your mouth, offering warmth in a way different from heat alone. Nearby, a small cloth pouch rests on the corner of the shelf. You untie it gently and discover dried willow bark chips inside. They have a light, woody scent. Old homesteaders often made decoctions from willow bark to ease aches and fevers. You close the pouch again, imagining a parent stirring such a mixture late at night for a child shivering under quilts, or an exhausted ranch hand nursing sore muscles after a day spent chopping frozen logs. Your gaze drifts toward a stone mortar on the table. Bits of dried herbs cling to its inner surface. You run a finger along the rough bowl. Someone ground herbs here earlier in the season, preparing small stores of powders and teas. Such small acts were part of winter readiness. They gave families tools to handle the aches, chills, and weariness that came with long nights. You return to your cup and take another sip. The warmth spreads through your throat and down your spine. You exhale slowly, feeling the steam warm your face before it fades into the room. A gentle ease begins to settle over you, and you understand why these simple remedies became beloved parts of nightly rituals. You turn your attention to a strange little object at the edge of the shelf, a lump of darkened resin wrapped in cloth. You recognize it from scattered frontier anecdotes. Some families use spruce resin as a kind of nighttime tonic, chewing small pieces to ease chest discomfort or to help clear the throat. You unwrap it slightly and smell it. The scent is sharp and piney, carrying a hint of sweetness. You wrap it again and place it gently on the shelf. A faint memory from one traveller's journal drifts into your thoughts. He described families adding a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg to hot water for warmth and comfort. Spices were rare and treasured, often saved for special winter nights. You imagine sprinkling just a hint of spice into your cup and savouring the luxurious aroma. As you sip the last of your tea, you become aware of a deeper stillness settling in your mind. The remedies are not strong enough to banish the cold or silence the wind, but they create a small island of comfort inside the larger world of winter hardship. You place the empty cup back on the table. The quiet glow of the embers reflects inside it, giving the cup a warm halo. You let your thoughts wander to how different families must have relied on their local plants for comfort. Some used elderberry for colds. Others steeped juniper berries in hot water to soothe the nerves. Some even believed that drinking certain broths before sleep could ward off troubling dreams. Scholars sometimes discuss whether these remedies truly offered medical benefits, or whether their comfort came mostly from ritual and warmth. Others argue that many of these plants genuinely ease symptoms, especially when no other medicine was available. As you stand here in the glow of the fire, sipping the last memory of mint from your lips, you sense how truth likely sits between both views. Warm tea and gentle ritual heal something far deeper than just the body. The fire crackles softly, reminding you that the night remains cold. You tighten your coat and return to the bed. The traveller shifts slightly but remains asleep. You slip beneath the buffalo robe once more, your body relaxing instantly into the warmth. The faint sweetness of honey still lingers on your tongue. The warmth of tea rests in your chest. The room feels softer, quieter, almost tender. You close your eyes and let the comfort of these simple remedies pull you gently toward rest again. You settle deeper into the quilts, letting the last traces of mint and honey warmth drift through your chest. The cabin feels still again, but the quiet brings another awareness to the surface. In the Old West, winter nights were not only a battle against cold and exhaustion, they were also moments when illness or injury could turn a simple evening into a fearful vigil. You feel that truth now as you shift your weight, and imagine the unease that once crept through families whenever someone coughed too harshly or shivered too deeply in the dark. You lift your head slightly and listen. The traveller beside you breathes steadily. The dog's soft huffs blend with the low hum of the fire. But your thoughts drift toward a time when those sounds carried different meanings. A rattling breath, a persistent cough, the feverish tossing of a child. Winter amplified every symptom. Illness lingered longer, struck harder, and frightened the entire household. You sit up, pulling the buffalo robe around your shoulders as you move quietly toward the table where the small remedies still rest. You run your thumb along the rim of the tin cup. A thin coldness pulses through the metal.